We are going through one of the great transformations in our history, energy transformations. And the electrification is the architecture for economic transformation.
The state of California has taken a dramatic step toward addressing climate change. This summer, regulators decided that by the year 2035, you will not be able to buy a new gas-powered vehicle in our state. It is a major shift toward electric vehicles meant to reduce carbon emissions.
And it's a decision that will have a ripple effect across the country, with many other states following California's lead. But the road ahead is filled with obstacles. How will car makers be able to produce millions more electric vehicles? And will they become more affordable for the average consumer? Also, how are we going to charge all of those new EVs here in California? Now on The Four, we'll take a closer look at some of the major challenges of California's electric revolution.
Well, California culture, we know, is synonymous with the car, but we are all about to experience a cultural shift, and it will mean less filling up and more plugging in.
Over the next 12 years, the gas-powered car will slowly be phased out in this state. And like many of you, we have a lot of questions about how this transition will play out and what will it mean for the average driver. So over the next half hour, we want to explore what it will take for California to go electric.
We'll be talking with a variety of people about California's requirement, including a member of California's Air Resources Board, the agency that approved this rule. You'll also hear from a representative of the auto industry as well as a local environmental group. But we want to start here this afternoon with Asha Weinstein-Agrawal, who is the director of the National Transportation Finance Center at San Jose State University's Mineta Transportation Institute. Asha, great to have you here today. We appreciate the time. Let's start by just sort of laying out for everybody how these regulations will be phased in slowly, year by year, as we move toward 2035. And what do you think the most important things are for consumers to know about this transition?
Well, I'm glad you're starting with that. Just quick overview of the facts, because I think there's often a lot of confusion. Some people think that, come 2035, they won't be allowed to drive a gas or diesel vehicle. So instead, what these regulations are doing is mandating that when new vehicles are sold in California, that increasing proportions of them have to be electric. And so by 2035, it would no longer be possible to sell new vehicles that are gas or diesel powered. So again, I want to emphasize people who may love their cars,
Right.
You're not going to be forced by the state to get rid of them. It's simply when we purchase new vehicles that they will have to be electric.
We know, though, that these are some of the stringent rules for transitioning to zero-emission vehicles. Traditionally, 16 other states have kind of followed California's lead, and I believe we have a look at those states. Given the fact, though, that these are so stringent, do you think that those other states will, in fact, follow suit?
I actually do, and of course it's a crystal ball. Nobody knows for certain, but there are a couple of reasons. One is certainly, it's been pretty steady over decades, other states following the lead in California. But I actually think that up until now, I think it was a little bit more of an open question. Is this really going to happen? Are we really moving to an electric future? And I think we've hit a point where most people have realized, yes, we are. And even without California's lead, I think that will move other states faster, but I think people are realizing that this is where the world is going. And
And this is the future, and that's what so many people say. What is it going to take for us to reach this ambitious goal of selling only new electric cars here in California? How do we overcome these challenges when it comes to affordability and also the lack of infrastructure for charging these electric vehicles?
Yes, and one thing I will say, which you didn't mention as a challenge, which I agree with, is I think the technology is more or less here. For decades, people wondered, can you really drive them? Will the batteries last? And happily, I think we all know now that they could get better, but they work. They're usable for an average family. So the challenge of infrastructure is something that is interesting, because this is not just a state requirement, but we're going to have all of our local governments working together with state and federal agencies to think about how do we get everybody charging their vehicles conveniently. And a lot of what we've heard about is setting up public charging stations with the idea that it would mimic a gas station. I drive up, I plug in. And while we certainly need that, I think actually a lot of what we need to be thinking about is how can people, where they're parking anyway, be perhaps more slowly charging their vehicles, because that infrastructure is a lot easier and less expensive to put in. So I think we'll be seeing many cities, counties thinking about requirements, maybe that employer parking lots might have charging facilities. New apartment buildings might have to think about charging facilities for residents.
Seems like everyone is going to have to rethink what we have right now and put those efforts towards getting us to this goal. I know you're going to be staying with us. We have a lot more questions for you. Thank you very much. We're going to, though, move on and talk about the greenhouse gas emissions. As we mentioned, right now, passenger vehicles account for about 1/3 of all of the greenhouse gas emissions right here in California.
And earlier, I had a chance to talk with the chief of the Advanced Clean Cars program at the California Air Resources Board. Again, this is the agency that approved these requirements in California, and I asked him about the impact that these new rules are going to have.
As a result of that, we project that the greenhouse gas emissions from passenger vehicles will be cut in half by 2040 when you look at the vehicles as they move into the fleet in use. So you can see that even when we're going to aggressive sales of 100%, we're still not getting to zero emissions for all the vehicles on the road. So we feel we're taking a really important, necessary step to address public health.
All right. Obviously, there are quite a few challenges to reach this goal as a state, not the least of which is the fact that we just need more places for people to charge their electric vehicles. What role does the state play in building more charging stations across the state, and how does it get funded?
Good question. We recognize the need for charging infrastructure for every driver. The state has a large role. Private investments and infrastructure companies also have a very large role, so we want to complement what they're doing. The state role includes investments, so the state budget, including some funds just committed to by the state legislature in this year's budget, go a long way to provide direct grants to charging companies to install chargers. We have investments from Electrify America, from the Volkswagen settlement, and I'll just generally say that it's most critical for people to have charging at home. That's, they're single family homes for a lot of people. It's easier to electrify, put a dedicated circuit in your garage. But the big challenge is on some of the older buildings, particularly apartments and more urban settings. And so we really are putting some actions there with state funds and policies to get at some of those areas. The last thing I'll mention too about the state role is oversight for the electric utilities. So there's large investments coming from the big investor-owned utilities for infrastructure for charging that will really help get California moving forward.
Okay, and on the issue of charging, when you have millions more Californians all of a sudden plugging in their EVs overnight, a lot of us look at this and think, well, this is going to put an incredible strain on the power grid. What is being talked about in terms of upgrading California's power grid to be able to meet that demand down the road?
Fair question. We get that question a lot. It's an important one. We do believe that the grid is going to be able to handle the electric vehicle loads coming online. Part of that is because there's very important strategies and long-term investments that are handled with the California Energy Commission, the California Public Utilities Commission, to ensure that we're putting in place some investments and back-end infrastructure now looking forward. But I'll say with today's EV loads on the grid, we're less than 1% of the statewide total grid capacity. And by 2030, we project it'll still be under 5%.
How is the state going to make sure that all Californians, especially low-income Californians, are able to afford electric vehicles in the future?
Yeah, that is the most important question. For us to require the automakers to move these markets, we need to have consumers buying the cars. I'll just say a few things about the current market today. The average electric vehicle price is high, but that's because most of the cars being sold are in the upper price point. Some of them are premium electric vehicles on the market, but there are products on the market today. There are sedans that you can buy that are in the mid $20,000s, $25,000, $26,000 that are obviously a more normal price range. The number of vehicle models coming out in the next few years with those lower price points is going to grow. And we really feel strongly that one of the benefits of our regulation, where we put clear signals for automakers long term, is that they make investments globally for their manufacturing, for their supply base, and that helps bring down costs for their technologies. And that benefits everybody in California and any other market that they sell. And so, to that point, in our regulation, we believe that a battery electric vehicle is going to be the same price as a conventional car by just after 2030. But when you factor in the driver savings over 10 years with fuel cost shifts off of gasoline onto cheaper electricity, maintenance savings, and all the other factors that go into it, we think that when a buyer goes to buy a car in 2026, they'll reach break even within a year, and they'll see, over $3,000 savings over 10 years.
Reaching California's climate goals is going to take a major investment from car makers. Coming up here on The Four, we'll talk with a representative from the auto industry about what it will take to produce millions more electric vehicles.
The auto industry is investing massively in technology to electrify light-duty vehicles, cars and light trucks that people drive every day in California.
The president of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation answers our questions about supply shortages and charging infrastructure and whether car makers will be able to meet California's requirements. Welcome back. Most car makers here in the U.S. and around the world already are ramping up production of electric vehicles, but California's requirements for 100% EV sales by the year 2035 is going to pose a challenge to the industry. Roughly 2 million new cars are sold every year here in California. I had a chance to talk with John Bozzella, the president and CEO of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, about what it will take to build that many more EVs.
The real barriers are beyond the industry, and they're frankly beyond organizations like the California Air Resources Board. The barriers really include things like charging infrastructure. Do we have enough chargers? Do we have an equitable distribution of chargers, not just for people who are fortunate enough to live in single-family homes, but people who live in apartment buildings and condos and in communities where you don't see charging today? So charging infrastructure is clearly a significant barrier. Also, is affordability. Inflation is a challenge. The availability of raw materials and critical components to these vehicles is expensive and challenging to get right now. And so we need to work on producing supply chains that create enough material for us to be able to produce vehicles at these volumes.
We talk about these precious minerals that have to be produced, lithium, nickel, and cobalt among them to make the batteries that go inside these electric vehicles. Is the auto industry going to be able to find enough of these raw materials to produce enough electric vehicles in the next decade or so? And if not, where do you go to find those materials?
Yeah, look, that's a big question, right? So we are working as an industry aggressively, not only with government agencies like the U.S. Department of Energy and state agencies like the California Air Resources Board, but more importantly, we're working with suppliers and we're working with the mines and we're working, with processors of those materials.
What is the role of the auto industry going to be in building up that charging infrastructure?
Yeah, so first, we're going to be working with power companies, electrical utilities, to make sure they understand where vehicle demand is going. And then that will allow us to help consumers understand how to most affordably charge their vehicles. Roughly 80% of electric vehicle owners today charge at home. And so we want to make sure, first and foremost, that we're partnering with utilities to make sure that that process is seamless and affordable. Secondly, we are working with public charging developers to map out where charging should be installed and how it should be installed. We've laid out a series of attributes. For example, the charging should be seamless. Customers should be able to pay with a credit card. By the way, the charging stations should work when you pull up and put the plug in. And so we're doing a lot of work with utilities and with charging producers to develop a network.
Will the price of electric vehicles come down significantly over the next decade or so? And how much more affordable do you expect they will get?
Yes, there's no question that if we're going to be successful in appealing to a broad spectrum of the public, and certainly if the regulation has any chance of success, we are going to have to sell vehicles to anybody and everybody. And so affordability is a factor, and it's going to, but I do believe that you will see more affordable vehicles coming into the market. But it isn't just about the price point of a vehicle. There's a lot that goes into that, right? We do need more affordable raw materials and access to raw materials. We need those raw materials available here in the United States. We need them processed here in the United States. And also, we need to continue to work with government to make sure that the requirements that government establishes for these technologies don't require the addition of technology that in a way that it doesn't benefit consumers. And so really those are the keys to affordability.
Do you believe it is feasible to make it to 2035 and to have every new car sold in the state of California be all electric?
The feasibility of this regulation is going to be determined by the availability of charging infrastructure, by the availability and affordability of and price of raw materials, and really whether we have a resilient grid with appropriate support. And so those are the definitions of feasibility. Certainly we can make these vehicles today. We are making these vehicles today. They're exciting and fun to drive. But if you want to know whether we're going to make this regulation, it really comes down to those factors.
Okay, so we know that supply and cost are big factors here, Asha. I mean, we have to have vehicles, electric vehicles, that people of all income levels can afford.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I think there are a variety of solutions. Part of it is just that as the technology becomes more mature, prices will automatically fall. But I think something else that we probably really want to think about is perhaps we're about to shift into a world where cars aren't all the same. So right now, you know, most people have a car or vehicle that can carry at least 5 people, that can go 300 miles, et cetera. And we certainly are going to still have need for vehicles like that. But realistically, a lot of vehicles get driven 10 miles to work and 10 miles back. And it's also true that in California, most families have more than one car. Right. And so I think that we may start to see more and more people wanting maybe that second or third smaller vehicle, which is going to have far fewer batteries needed, which makes it cheaper, quicker to charge and such.
In the long run, is it going to be more affordable, as the state believes, more affordable at some point to own and to operate an electric vehicle than it is a gas-powered vehicle?
Yes, I think it will. There doesn't seem to be, there's some debate in the industry about when we'll reach cost parity between an electric vehicle and a gas vehicle, but everyone seems to pretty much agree we'll get there. And you know, I have an electric car. I don't get an oil change. I don't really need tune-ups, and it costs me less to pay for the power than the gas. So
there are other
operations, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Asha. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Environmental experts say California's shift to electric vehicles is going to have a dramatic impact on climate change. Woody Hastings with the Climate Center here in the Bay Area will join us live up next to discuss the steps that California will need to take to fully phase out fossil fuels.
Continuing to take a look at California's electric revolution, and a study from UC Berkeley sheds more light on where voters fall on California's EV mandate. 55% of California voters are in favor of this mandate, while 39% are opposed. That leaves about 6% indifferent or undecided thus far.
And these numbers clearly break down along party lines, with 77% of those in favor of the regulations being Democrats, and of the 39% who are opposed, 81% are Republicans.
Transportation is the single largest source of emissions in California, so that switch from gas to electric is expected to drastically reduce emissions and air pollutants.
For more, we're joined now to discuss the environmental impact of these regulations. We have Woody Hastings, who is the Energy Program Manager at the Santa Rosa-based Climate Center. Woody, great to have you on today. We appreciate you taking the time. The Air Resources Board says these requirements will cut greenhouse gas emissions here in California in half by 2040. Does that go far enough for you? Do you think these regulations are aggressive enough?
Well, the Climate Center, no, we've long felt that the California's greenhouse gas emission reduction goals in general are not fast enough. So we're always pushing to advance the goals and the targets. I want to say that the poll that was just put out there, glad to see that there's in general a little over 50% in support. I do want to say this really shouldn't be a partisan issue. Cleaning the air, dealing with the climate crisis, that's what the Climate Center is all about. But let's remember that this also helps with nose level air quality and cleaning the air for all of us. So this is a good goal. I think the Air Resources Board did the right thing in August with setting this marker in 2035 that no new gas cars will be registered. And let's remember, that's all this is. You'll still be able to drive your gas car if you still have one in 2035. And you'll still be able to buy a used gas car on the secondary market in 2035. This just halts the sales of new gas cars in 2035. So even if this happened today, you wouldn't see a huge shock.
Okay, 20 seconds here for you, Woody. What type of overall impact do you think, if we meet this goal, that it will have?
Well, the transition is already underway. The transition is underway, and the impact is, since transportation is 50% of the overall greenhouse gas emission in California, you're going after the biggest chunk. So if we can really put a dent in the biggest piece of the greenhouse gas emission pie, then we're making a difference. And notice that the auto industry is not up in arms about this goal. They're already doing it. We heard that a little bit earlier here, and so this is something that we can do. It's technologically feasible, and about the cost and the low-income folks, and that's a very significant concern, and folks that live in multifamily dwellings and all that. Right now, Consumer Reports has put out a series of
Yeah, no, that is such an important issue that obviously needs to be addressed here in the years to come. We really appreciate you taking the time today. We have to leave it there. Woody Hastings is with the Climate Center in Santa Rosa. Thank you for doing it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the big questions about going electric is, how will the world produce enough batteries? And Prius Technologies, based in Fremont, is a leading manufacturer of high-energy and high-capacity lithium-ion batteries. Now, its focus right now is on aerospace and aviation, with an eye on electric vehicles in the future. Earlier this weekend, Prius received a $1 million grant from the Department of Energy. And I talked with John Borenstein, the Chief Operating Officer of Prius, and he told me these funds will help accelerate the company's push into mass production and help build a significant industrial base right here in the U.S.
The goal is to electrify mobility, whether you're driving or flying or on a scooter or whatever mode of transportation you're on. It's electrified, or will be very shortly. Certainly in this state, we're going to accelerate that. So we want high performance batteries that are cost effective, so that we can drive longer or fly longer or get to where we're going if it's a little bit further than our current batteries will allow for. And that's where we come in. Our cells have much higher energy density, which allow for longer endurance. You can essentially go further. and not increase the weight or the volume required in your car or in the airplane. In fact, it's even lighter weight at a given energy because of our technology solution.
A lot of people love California's ambition, but I think there are people who are skeptical.
Yeah, so the key to any industry and getting cost-effective solutions is having mass production. That is, having factories that are churning out a lot of that product. And that's how you get costs down, and that's how you get proliferation of that solution into the marketplace. If you're at small scale and at high price, it just doesn't go very far. So you got to get big factories, and many of them, producing at low cost so that you can sell to the consumer at a price that he or she can afford. And that's what we're participating in. So the ultimate goal, and as you mentioned, we're currently addressing high performance applications. We have limited manufacturing capacity. It plays to our wheelhouse to ship into mass to high performance because of our limited but high performance solution. Going forward, as we scale, and with the economy of scale, we reduce price, we get much more production, we get prices to a point where we can now get into mass production for EVs, for example. And that's really where everything needs to go relative to the mass production. That is low cost for mass use. And EV is the most obvious example of that.
And Bornstein tells me that Amprius will boost production by 10% in the next year thanks to that grant. And from there, he expects growth of 100 up to 1,000 in 3 to 5 years. So, Alex, they really are making an effort. They see where the future lies, and they're charging right toward it.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So many companies, car makers obviously included, really embracing this shift toward electric vehicles. Yeah, it's interesting to see what will come in the years to come here in California. We are going to continue our coverage of California's electric revolution, both on air as well as online.
You can find these stories and more right in the palm of your hand on the KTVU app or at ktvu.com.